I'd just like to welcome you back to the theater and say thank you for coming to listen to my presentation today. Isn't it nice to have a day off? Haven't we already been everywhere and seen everything and all we want to do is sleep late? Well, we didn't get that opportunity today since the clock jumped forward, but if you have trouble sleeping, my talks are on the Enrichment Channel all night long. And today I want to talk about our upcoming ports. Well, and maybe not. Well, they were beautiful. What can I say? That's. Well, then I'm going to go back just by way of introduction. I'm a mariner, a merchant marine officer with the active U.S. Coast Guard license. So I've worked on ships around the world. And recently I've been captain of a research vessel based in the Mediterranean, which is currently in dry dock in Spain. And the institute that runs this research vessel out of London, took a cheaper bid from Spain rather than having it done in France. So it's costing half as much but taking 3 times as long because you don't work in the daytime in hot, sunny Spain. But meanwhile, I have the opportunity to come out on Regent and talk about these places. Just by curiosity, what our last project for this ship called the Heraclitus, named after the Greek philosopher, was to actually go to the most remote parts of the Mediterranean to compile a oral history from the oldest people we could find in all these little places around the Med for the new Museum of the Mediterranean in Marseille. And this is funded through a number of research institutes and the new museum. And for the last 2 years, we had been sailing on the North Mediterranean coast from Spain all the way over to Greece, and then we started to work on the south coast and all the islands to go into small ports, small islands, what I call our cafe research. We would go in, dock or anchor, go in and ask to meet and interview the oldest people we could find, who are often up in the villages, because this program was to try to capture some of the memory that is rapidly being lost, of course, as many places in the Mediterranean, the younger generation have moved off to the cities, or they don't know the trades of the boat building or the fishing or the stories of the various wars of course, the Mediterranean has a lot of trouble going on its own now, so that we went out to capture this memory, which is we have thousands of hours of video and audio recordings that are now in an archive. Curiously, we go to a place like Sardinia, we would have to have not only our Italian translator, then we'd have to have a Sardinian translator, and then often we'd have to have other family members to try to explain what we were being told. And I'm merely the captain of the ship, so I would go and just listen to all of this talk, and much of it was unintelligible to me. But unfortunately, as we are relaunching the ship, the decision has been made to leave the Mediterranean because of the refugee crisis. Now, this is a 3-masted sail ship that does not go too fast, and we would be under legal authority, or rather requirement, to pick up refugees wherever we would go, and all on the North African coast, they're all in rubber boats and streaming out to get on any boat that's nearby. And so when we launch the ship later this year, we're leaving the Mediterranean because of this problem. And this is perhaps an echo of many other centuries where the Mediterranean has been this mixture of peoples and invaders and terrible wars and battles all from one end to the other. And other than, let's say, Syria, there's no hot war going on in places right where we are, but there are mementos to other conflicts that have, let's say, belabored this whole region for so many centuries. So the first stop, this is Corfu right here, a view of the city from the new fort area. Corfu was considered the door to Venice and the protector of Christendom from the invasions of the Ottomans. Now, it goes back much further into history because the Greeks were there, and Phoenicians were there even before then, the Romans, and I'll begin to show you just some of the views of it so you can appreciate where we're going and sort of the weight of history that is on the shores and islands in the mountains of all this area. Of course, we've already come all the way around the boot of Italy from Sicily, coming up to the northeast. And Corfu is the sickle-shaped island right off of the coast of Albania. And then we're going to continue up to Kotor and Korčula on our way to Venice. Now, this whole region of the Balkans has been in conflict going back into prehistory, perhaps, because all these isolated valleys and coastlines and plains constantly were being threatened by whatever neighbor there was. And this continues to this day with various local conflicts between Greece and Macedonia, between the Serbs and the Croats. And as I say, it's not a hot war now, but the tensions in this whole area continue. And it's a saying that the blood of the ancestors keeps rising out of the ground to afflict the current generations. And particularly the Serbs were complaining about the defeat they had in the 1200s, and they're getting their revenge on the Bosnians who get their revenge on this, that, and the other. And it's a pretty sad tale of human conflict that becomes almost gratuitous. But anyway, Corfu and the Ionian Sea islands of Greece are on the other side of the whole mainland of Greece and the Peloponnese, the larger part of it to the south. And they were very much under the influence of the Italians in recent years. So that Corfu was sort of a mixture of a Greek island with Greek as the national language, but the old-time residents speak what's called Italkian, which is also a version of Venetian. They call it Veneto da Mar, which is the common language of all the Venetian areas all through the Adriatic and other parts of the Mediterranean. Corfu being this sort of extended island right off the coast of Albania, the other islands further down, and there's transit between all these areas by the various ferry systems, and of course this is a beautiful area for sailing and recreation, and so it's become a major tourist region in recent decades, with particularly where you can fly right into Corfu now. You used to have to always take a boat, or back in the old days you'd have to row and get beaten all the way. Oh well, that's a different cruise line. But here's one of the beautiful bays, Achios Gregorius, which is typical of Corfu. You have these hills up above these beautiful scallop bays. This is said where that bay there was where Odysseus himself landed after his great journey into after the fall of Troy and such. Jason and the Argonauts are said to come here and land and on their way bringing the golden fleece back to Ithaca, Ithaca being another island, of course. This is where we'll be landing, the Bay of Garitsa in Corfu, which is, Corfu is not a very big city. It's about 13,000 people in it, so it's not so big. This is one of the outlying peninsulas right off of the town of Corfu, which is called French the Canal d'Amour. That's where Jason the Argonaut is said to have married Medea. In the cave, you can see in the middle of the picture, there's a gap and there's a sea cave that goes right through, so you can go swimming into it and get on a rock and get married and then swim out and go find another mate perhaps. But this is where these lands are so full of mythology and stories, it's hard to keep up. And even Corfu Island, called Charybdis in Greek, was supposedly made by the marriage of the sea god Poseidon with a sea nymph, and then as a gift made an island where they could enjoy themselves on the beaches. So this is another curious island off of Corfu called Pontikonisi, which is in Greek means the mouse island, and it has a Greek Orthodox monastery on it. But it's called that because they built this marble staircase up to the monastery, so it looks like a white mouse on a hill with the tail down to the sea. And there are other settlements around the island. It's actually a fairly large island, so some of the tours will take you to some of the outlying villages and beaches and things. But the city itself is concentrated right on a peninsula which is heavily fortified. And this is the history of Corfu, that it was always being invaded by one or the other, and so there are fortresses on all the ridges around the town. The the Ottoman Turks laid siege in 1537 for many, many months, but the fortresses built by the Phoenicians, like this is the main citadel, could never be breached by the Turks, and therefore it held the, let's say, the eastern flank of Christendom. Barbarossa, the great Turkish admiral who laid siege to Corfu, said, "I will conquer here, then we will go to Italy, and we will put the Pope's head on a spike in the new mosque called the Vatican," just like the Turks took Constantinople and turned the great cathedral into the great mosque that it is today. So back a few hundred years ago, this was very serious business. And at the Battle of Lepanto on the Greek coast, the Venetian fleet with the Corfians, they call them, the Corfu people, joined in with a combined European fleet to defeat the Turkish navy and then prevent the conquest of Italy by the Turks back in the mid-1500s. So the remains of this are there. That's the more recent history. Going back even further, there are Greek temple remains. This wasn't, as I said, a very early Greek colony, or rather a homeland, and so they have found various remains of different temples, the temple of Dionysus with his wine jug, and the Gorgon, the great kind of monster of Greek mythology, is there. By the way, yesterday in Taormina, I don't know if anybody saw that archaeological museum, they had a whole display of Gorgon masks that they had found right there at the dock in the excavations of the old city right there that date back to about 700 BC. So, of course, the Greek heritage is sort of renewed and vaunted in many ways these days after, in 1821, Greece struggled to get its independence from the Ottoman Turkish Empire. And in Corfu, in 1893, the Empress Elizabeth of the Austro-Hungarian Empire built a summer resort castle in Corfu, and then made a beautiful garden called the Achilleonis, which is the monument to Achilles, which we will visit when we're there. So, of course, Achilles, the great hero of the Trojan Wars, and so this became a favorite winter vacation place for Kaiser Wilhelm, who ended up buying the whole estate and then made it sort of the German resort, or rather Austrian resort. This is Achilles himself, where he's trying to pull the sword of Paris out of his foot, and that was, of course, the death of Achilles. That was his weak spot. So this sort of romanticizes the Greek tradition to the point where this is all fairly recently built. Again, in the 1890s it was built, and it features the muses, the Greek maidens of the arts, and other archaeological remains they found. This is from a tomb on Corfu of Menecrates, who was a former Greek ruler of the island. And so there's that deep history, let's say. This is actually St. George's Temple was one of the Greek temples that has been rebuilt and became a Greek Orthodox church. But around the city of Corfu, there are all these fortresses which have protected it over and over again over the years. That's why in Greek they call the whole town the Cassiope Polis, which means the city of castles. And this is the oldest one that's in the close into town. The Venetians built the largest fortifications, and that's what fended off the Ottomans and then kept the island as a Christian island. But you see the Lion of Venice and monuments to their different struggles in Corfu. This is actually 1727, if you know your Roman letters. So there were remains of the Venetian arsenals and shipyards and fortresses that kept the island. Another, the Castle of Angelocastra Castle up on the hill. And of course, back before more devastating artillery, these castles were impregnable. And the sieges were a terrible feature of warfare back then. Now they are opened up as museums and overlooks and have cafes. So the troubles of the past are just in the past. And now we get to visit these places. This is the, they call the Neo Frorio, which is the new castle. This is the biggest castle overlooking Corfu, built by the Venetians again. It has somewhat of a difficult history because in World War II, when the Italians capitulated under the Allied invasions, the Germans came in and bombed Corfu because it was going to be taken by the Allies. And then they had paratroops, they took the city, then they rounded up the resistance, and they also collected all the thousands of Jews that lived in the Jewish quarter in Corfu and took them and incarcerated in the castle and then shipped them off to Auschwitz. Today there are only about 65 left in the whole town. So this is now open to the public to go up and see. It's a very big fort. That's the old citadel. Then the town itself is full of narrow lanes and various buildings of mostly Venetian construction. The oldest settlements in Corfu are actually not on this area. They're Greek ruins outside. The other smaller areas that had been settled so many millennia ago, but the main town, you can see how narrow it is. Of course, the Venetians came and they liked to be close to each other, so they built everything pretty packed in. Corfu is also famous in Greek history because it was the home of Ioannis Kapodistrias, who was the founder of the modern state of Greece, he was the governor of Corfu, became the first president of the Greek Republic in the 1820s. And this was after, this is his home in Corfu. This was after Napoleon had taken it, then the British made it a protectorate after the fall of Napoleon, and it was the British who, let's say, made modern Greece because they felt it should be independent from the Turks. Now, Corfu was independent, but much of the rest of Greece was under Ottoman rule for so long, so that the Greek-British alliance was critical to the independence of all of modern Greece. And so here's a commemorative postcard thanking Britain for allowing the independence of the Greeks. So this is Corfu in the earlier days with the new fort above it. And before World War I, as I mentioned, this was a place where the Austrian and also German Kaiser would come and stay. This is his private dock with a bridge that he would walk over the road. That's no longer there currently, but Corfu became a sort of a bastion in the World War. So World War I was held by the Allies. World War II was fought over. Here's one of the cannon overlooking the harbor. So it was, let's say, continued in its military tradition. These are Serbian soldiers who had been driven down. They were allied with versus the Austrian and Hungarian Empire, and they came and actually took Corfu as a bastion to keep the struggle from coming into Greece. Where this gets complicated, who was on which side. These are Italian soldiers who had surrendered to the Allies, who were being rounded up by the Germans, as I mentioned. So this, let's say, bad history can be sort of appreciated today. Now it's a peaceful place, but one of the characteristics of Corfu is that they have a history of marching bands. Now this comes perhaps from the military, but in Corfu they have these musical societies. Every neighborhood has a marching band where, particularly on Easter Day, they parade around the town. And this was banned by various of the rulers because it was a popular resistance. But now they have a sort of a competition of who has the best band for marching. And on Easter, they could not say you cannot celebrate. So they would all come out, and that today is a tradition in Corfu. And as we go around the town, you can see all these incredibly narrow lanes. Now, there's no gondola because this is a dry town, but it's very much like Venice. As I said, these are called kaninastru in Greek, these little narrow lanes which are a feature of Old Town Corfu. But, of course, like in much of these parts of the world where the town was built before those four-wheeled horseless carriages came through, it gets incredibly jammed up with cars, which is one of the banes of society, but our convenience. But as you go out of the main Old Town, you find monuments like this. This is actually one of the British High Commissioners Sir Douglas, and another one to John Maitland, another British commissioner. So as I mentioned, the British influence here is strong to the point where now Corfu has a very good cricket team, for those who can understand that. And outside some of the official buildings of the government, Palacio Anacordia, and the Teatro San Giacomo, which was a Venetian-style opera house that was built as now the city hall. They had built a very much bigger, elaborate opera hall. I'll show you in a minute. But meanwhile, there are houses like this of poets and writers. Corfu considers itself a intellectual center because of the Ionian University and schools of the arts, music. There are a lot of famous Greek writers who have lived here, come from there. Beautiful gardens, and here's the Ionian Institute, which was founded back in the 1830s to study ancient Greek culture, which of course has had a great revival, and various other Venetian-style mansions. If you're looking for real estate, there are a few ones that need a new investor here. Just another home. This was the Grand Theater that was built in the 1850s, but it was bombed to complete destruction in 1943 by the German Luftwaffe. And so this is much to the regret of the music-loving Corfidians, and so they felt they had to build a new theater, but to rebuild that was so expensive. They built this, which looks like some sort of a cinema, and they've complained so much about this. They're thinking of decorating it to look a little more elegant than a big shoebox. Well, anyway, that's just the way of the world. One of the local features, like everywhere we go, there's another liquor. This is kumquat, wine and liquor, in case you can't get it on the ship. But anyway, it's an interesting place. And I'm going to go on up the coast now to Montenegro. Now this is coming into the, let's say, the Dalmatian coast. Geographically it features this incredible inland fjord, which is actually a flooded river valley where Kotor is. Now Montenegro is a new state that is forged out of the dissolution of Yugoslavia and then the Balkan Wars of the 1990s and early part of this century, and it's, let's say, a micro-state that is very proud of itself, that it's independent from the Serbians especially, and along with Kosovo and Croatia, they've all become independent, and it's, let's say, a historical discussion. How can a very small country like this survive without protection? But I'll go on to that. I'll just show you where we're going. This is one of the most dramatic ports we'll see because it almost has a Norwegian fjord-like quality with this ancient town right in the middle, an old trading town that has been traded back and forth itself under all the different empires. Kotor. So you can see how the mountains come down to the sea in a very dramatic sense. So Montenegro is a country that is almost all mountains, and the name of it means the dark mountains, which are called that way because they're heavy forests right up above the sea here, and very little flat land, very little agriculture in this part of the world. So Kotor and the others are sort of a sea-based culture, and nowadays one of their biggest sources of income is us. You can see a cruise ship that came in, and the other one that's been following us, the great Star Clipper like that. So that just being able to access this place by sea is a very good way to travel because you really feel like you're getting somewhere rather than sort of just flying in and wondering where you are. So when we come into Kotor, we go through some narrow gaps past some of the old Venetian forts again that protected the harbor. And in the history of this particular town, it was traded between the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the French, then finally the British came in, and in the Napoleonic Wars, they came in and on a quiet day, and they had to throw anchors on the shore and pull themselves around the forts, and the local people had an uprising, and it ended up being, again, a British protectorate after Napoleon was defeated. But the remains of those forts are there. We'll see them as we sail in. And then there's this broad mountain valley with the old town and various new town. That's a new fortress of condominiums being built with a marina. That's the modern struggle. How can you possibly get a dock for your yacht? This is, again, one of the Venetian forts with a dockage where the fleet of the Austro-Hungarian Navy used to be docked. It was all seized in World War I, though, finally. And now it's a pretty small town. Again, about 10,000 people in the town, very ancient town center and very quiet place, not nearly as bustling as where we have been. Not overwhelmed with visitors even, so that the only visitors probably off of a ship. That's how we get there most easily, but it won't be so crowded like in all of Italy, let's say. But it's very dramatic and scenic. Now this is the old maritime gate into the town, which has a curious inscription on the top of it from Generalissimo Tito, who led the resistance in World War II. And it's an old saying in the area that it's an abbreviation. It says, "We do not want what others have, but we will keep what is ours," which is a saying which I can only think it means that they've been feeling victimized by all the invaders, and just leave us alone. We don't want what you have, and please don't come and steal what we have. So, I mean, all the Balkans have this problem of fighting with each other and then outside forces, so that the tendency is to hide behind your city walls and sort of wait out your time and just have a life as you can before the next disaster happens. This is the town square with